Welcome to another lecture on Python variables. Well, when you think about programming and software at high level, it's all about manipulating data. As I mentioned earlier on the previous lecture, that we use variables to track player score, number of lives that the player has, and the level of the player. Therefore, what is now a variable? In short, a variable is just a container for data. The most important thing to understand about Python variables is that they both have a name and a value. For example, if I want to track my age inside a program, I can simply create a variable called my age, which my age is the name of the variable. But because my age is just a container for data, and I can also give it a value, so I can put the number 32 inside my age. In programming language, this is called assigning a value to a variable. So as time passes and our program runs, we might need to update this variable, and we can do that simply by updating the value inside my age with a new value. So we can replace the value 32 with the value 33. So the question is, what will this look like in Python syntax? So back to my code editor, I'm gonna create a variable my age and use the equal sign to assign the value 32. So this name my age is now how we can refer to the number 32 in Python programming. And to display the value inside my age variable, I'm simply going to use the print, open brackets, my age. Then I'm going to click on the run button to display the value on the console. So suppose our program is now running and we need to update my age variable. We can do that by simply assigning a new value to it. Let's say my age equals 33. If I write print and then my age and click on the run button, then we will see the value 33 printed out on the console. Nevertheless, there are so much that you can achieve on how to update my age variable. For example, if we say my age is equal to my age plus 1. Now, if it's your first time learning to program, this line of code is actually going to look very strange. But what's going on here is that we are taking the previous value of my age, namely the value 33, on the right hand side of the equal sign, and then adding plus 1 to it. With that equal sign operator, we are storing this new value of my age 34, which is 33 plus 1 inside of my age at the left hand side. In other words, we are overwriting the previous value stored inside of my age variable. If we print my age now and click on the run button, we will see the value updated to 34. Now, let's do a quick exercise on using and manipulating variables in Python. So, as a challenge, can you create a program to calculate the area of a rectangle? What I need you to do is to create a variable called rectangle length and set its value to 10. And also create another variable rectangle breadth and also set its value to 5. And finally, create another variable called rectangle area and assign its value to rectangle length multiplied by the value rectangle breadth. Finally, print the value of rectangle area on the console. And you might be wondering about these 4 lines with the hash symbol. Well, these are actually Python comments. The Python interpreter ignores and also doesn't execute any line of code in Python starting with the hash symbol because the Python interpreter treats that as a comment. As a programmer, Commenting your code helps you and others to understand the intention of your code later in the future. This allows you to more easily find errors, fix them, and improve the code later on. So it is an essential part of your workflow and is seen as a good practice for good programmers. In that case, I will give you a few seconds to pause the video and give this challenge a go. Alright, so here is the solution. I'm gonna create a variable rectangle length equals to 10. And then for the second part, I'm gonna create another variable rectangle breadth with the value 5 assigned to it. And for the last variable, which is area, I'm gonna assign the expression of rectangle length multiplied by rectangle breadth. Then finally, I'm gonna print out the value of rectangle area. So when you click on the run button, you will see the value of rectangle area, which is 50, printed out on the console. Perhaps one thing that could have happened to you at this point is that you made a typo. In programming, everything is case sensitive, and if your variable names didn't match exactly to how they were defined, then you're gonna get some unexpected errors. For example, if this capital A in our print statement instead was a lowercase a and run the code, then we would get the following error, which as you can see, it's actually a name error. Name rectangle area is not defined. And this is because this rectangle area and this rectangle area are considered to be completely different entities. So you want to make sure that you never have any typos in your variable names. And the same thing happens if we miss a letter. For example, if we wrote rectangle length instead of rectangle length, when we run the code, then we would get exactly the same error. Our variable is not defined. In other words, the Python interpreter can't find something that matches this name. So let's wrap up our tutorial with something interesting about the variable names we've just written. Well, if you observe my variable names, I use the uppercase letter for each word. However, this is called coding style. But what do I actually mean by coding style? Well, coding style is whether you use capital or lowercase letters, whether you use tabs or spaces, where you put your curly brackets, and so on. It's actually how you arrange your code or what sort of syntax you use. Now, the thing about programming style is that the standards varies from various programming languages. So, the mainstream Python programming language is a little different from the mainstream Java program, which again is different from C++. So, the question is, how do we find what good Python programming style is or should be? And what are the guidelines we should follow, or what are the guidelines people tend to follow? Well, lucky for us, there are so many style guides out there on the internet. And the most popular style guide these days is the official one from the Python Software Foundation, and it's called PEP 8. It's pretty long and comprehensive, and also not something that you should tend to follow religiously, because it's actually a suggestion for writing readable Python code that is readable for humans, because the computers don't really care. So if you click on the naming conventions on the left hand side here, under descriptive naming styles, you will find different naming styles in Python. For example, you can use single lowercase letters to name your variables, or single uppercase letters, or even lowercase letters, and so on. And this is based on the Python Software Foundation, because this is not the only style guide out there. In fact, many companies have their own style guides too, and might be slightly different from the style guide from the Python Software Foundation. So, here is the Python style guide for engineers at Google. Now, looking through this and trying to spot the difference between the Google style guides and the Python software foundation. The thing is, these two style guides are very similar, but there are some differences because the Python software foundation says code line length should be 79 characters, and Google says the maximum line length should be 80 characters. So, as I said earlier, most of the suggestions are really very similar. And one of the things I found really interesting to me is that Google says to be consistent. And this is the formatting they use, all caps. And in contrast, the PEP 8 style guide from the Python Software Foundation says a foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. So, what they're really saying here is that you can be a bit more flexible in your coding style if you need to be. So, in the end, style guides are just readability of code. You yourself can make a choice. You can choose from one of these style guides and just stick to it if you actually need to. So, therefore, we've come to the end of this tutorial, and I'll see you in the next lecture. Take care.